It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. I am introducing you today to a dynamic and most of all, fun woman. The second we started talking, we threw the whole business conversation out the window and just started connecting. And in that moment, I knew this was the guest that I wanted to bring to Her Success Story. LaQuita Cleare is the CEO of Cleare Communications Academy. It's a highly sought after public speaking and communication, and she is a communication expert who believes in the power of words to create change. Her background for many years in Hollywood doing storytelling that she'll share a little bit with us. Also, she has lived and worked in 50 countries across 5 continents on stages and screens, speaking at numerous prestigious schools and events such as Loyola University, Milan Polytechno. And I'm sure I'm saying this wrong, LaQuita, so you need to correct me. And I'm going to stop talking about you and say, hey, welcome to the show, and let's talk together and learn a little something.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I absolutely love what you're doing. And yes, we connect, which is important.
So you're currently, we're talking today, you're back in California, got back, right?
Yes, just got back. I'm in LA.
LA, Southern California is your home base. Where did this company get birthed out of, and why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so the company got birthed out of Illinois. So I'm originally in Illinois, Midwest gal. And I don't want to say by accident because there are no real accidents, but I was doing acting work in Illinois, and my first agent, I would say, helped to birth this company because instead of making me famous like Meryl Streep, they were giving me speaking and corporate gigs instead. And I realized that I could kind of take my acting and love of communication and come up with a company to help people, which has since evolved quite a lot.
Wow. What was your aha moment? Were you on a stage? Were you doing the back end of a business? Were you traveling? What was that moment like for you?
Yeah, I feel like I've had so many aha moments that it's been crazy. But one of the biggest ones early on, which kind of was the catalyst for me really getting into this, was I was chosen by a big multinational law firm to be one of a handful of theater students who are going to help train their trial attorneys. So you can imagine being a young theater student and they're having to put trial attorneys through this kind of training. And I'm thinking like, why do big companies come to talk to like 20-year-olds? But it was then that I kind of realized for the first time that communication was about a lot more than just delivering information, because obviously these law firms didn't need us to help them put together information about cases. So this was like the big aha moment, but I feel like I have them every day, seriously.
You know, and it's interesting, listeners, as you're getting started in our conversation today, be aware of your aha moments as you listen to our dialogue. What resonates with you? What are you taking away from today? I'm going to give you a prompt at the end. Okay, so LaQuita, so where did this whole travel thing comes from? Because I know in our conversations, it's like I'm popping over to Milan. Oh, I'm just back to Tel Aviv. You know, you're all over the place. How has your company end up being this global sought after company? Because so we went from, this moment as a student and an actor of being brought into the legal field, right? And on the communication piece, the moment that you saw like, oh, I really like, you're booking me for this and I'm really loving this, to building a company that really delivers high impact content and training and communications.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what happened with the international, I didn't start out saying like, oh, I just want to travel around. I mean, of course, on a personal note, I always thought it was cool to travel. But I really just always wanted to help people. This was in my mind. So with help people there were no boundaries for me. So early on, in the US as well, I started getting clients that just happened to be from other countries. So that was more of the catalyst, is that I was helping people who were from Spain, who were from the UK, who were from India. And from there, in starting to help them, they started bringing me to their countries. But I think it's because communication is universal. And it's one of those things that it doesn't matter if you are, working as a janitor, a cashier at a grocery store, or you're leading a Fortune 100 company, communication is your key. So I think that's kind of what allowed me to grow the company, is that every single place that I go, people have the same challenges of communication. And that's what's so interesting, is like, yes, we're worlds apart, but we're so close when it comes to communication. So that's kind of how I started moving around and helping people with similar challenges.
Okay, so you bring up the word challenges, which I love. And I always say, we're all faced, challenges turn to opportunities, right? What are some of the challenges you see in the work you're doing today with your clients? What comes up repeatedly?
So one thing I find to be a big challenge, especially in the business world, is people don't necessarily understand how to turn kind of giving information into something that's dynamic. Because you're trained as someone who's in corporate America, or someone who's smart, just to figure out how to give people information, to show all that you know. But around the world, leaders never think about the delivery of information, or how to be fun, or how to be dynamic. It's like we're always leading with knowledge and power. And I find that to be a big challenge that people have, that they need to overcome. And a second big one is that I think it's hard for people to really think about their personal brand in their communication, because when you get up to speak, for example, in front of people, you're nervous. So I always say you have you, and then you have presentation you. And so I think that's it's not the same person.
I happen to love that. I think that is so spot on. We have the person who's like kind of lying back, sitting back in their chair, like doing their work, doing whatever, running day to day. And then it's like, okay, speak up at the meeting. And that person is not sitting back in the chair. They're sitting at the end of the chair. Their shoulders are about 3 inches higher.
Yep.
Maybe 4. And they're not thinking about their impact. They're thinking about their words.
Correct. This is exactly the problem. And I find it, like you said, I love that you use also meeting, because I feel like in my space, people think public speaking or communication is for like these big TED Talks, but it's not. This is stuff that you're doing every day. And I see people that are like, even in the break room, and they're so amazing, and they're dynamic, and they're having a one-on-one conversation. And I'm like, yes, you're so impactful, you're charismatic. And then boom, they go to present, and it's like, what happened? They're so focused on, what do they look like? Is it going to be good? All of these kind of inner monologue thoughts that the person that I saw in the other room doesn't come through. And that's the person that people want to see and connect to.
It's so true, because we have this energy about ourselves. Yet sometimes when we feel that and that quote unquote on stage could be a presentation to 10 people on your team, could be sitting in a boardroom, could be in so many things. And we go into this, for lack of a better word, imposter of who we think we're supposed to be showing up. Okay, I need to look and feel important. I have to, what I say has to sound good. It has to land like, oh, I look smart, versus I look authentic, vulnerable, and real.
Yeah, the look smart really resonates with me, because I feel like, especially with a lot of the audiences that I work with, they feel like that smartness and that power are always the things to lead with. And sometimes so much so that in order to give people knowledge, you give them so much. It's like a data dump on people. And what happens is they don't retain any of it, because you're trying hard to give them a lot. And then it's like, if I come to you and I just dump a bunch of stuff over your head, what are you going to retain? Probably only a couple of those things, if anything, because you'll be so overwhelmed. So I like that idea. If we can kind of change the way that we think of communication and presenting, and thinking about it more of the impact, the message, the connection, and the things that we want to share.
So how do you help your clients actually tap into that idea of creating the connection, the message, and lose that outer wall? I sometimes I refer to it as.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I do, even before thinking of what they're going to say or anything like that, is I really try to drill down into what their goal is with the person, the type of connection they want to create, and also the type of emotion that they want to create in whoever they're talking to. So I think that's the piece that people miss. But if you can understand the emotion that you want to create in your audience or your team, if you're having a meeting, then I can help them plan the content around that. So when people say, oh, I want to be motivational, and then they come with like 5,000 statistics, I'm like, how in the heck are you motivating anybody with all of that? So I think that's part of the thing that people need to think about is first the kind of the goal, the emotion, and then you start building and creating. And I think it's also we started this method, it's the CEO method of connecting, engaging, and outreach. And that's for all communication.
Okay, let's slow down here for LaQuita. The CEO method is about connecting, engaging, and outreach.
Yes.
That is brilliant. I have to stop you there because I have to hear more about that.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead.
It's resonating with me because it immediately starts taking the bricks off the wall. Mm-hmm. It takes the cinder blocks away because it's connecting, engaging. So you're not trying to deliver your brilliance per se, although you will be brilliant. We promise.
I love it. We promise. That's our promise to you, folks.
That's our promise to you. When you connect, engage, and outreach, that you have the opportunity to step into your brilliance versus sound brilliant.
Yes. For me, it resonates a lot. When we came up with that, I was really talking to my team and trying to figure out what was I finding to be kind of the missing piece in most companies and most people's communication. And so much so that we thought about how to kind of build and develop this idea, trademarked it. So it's like a whole process of being able to teach people how to communicate so that it inspires action. That's what I like to say, because action can be something within someone. Action can be persuading people to buy things. Action can be inspiring or motivating your team to have higher productivity. But without one of these pieces, if you don't connect, how can I listen to what you're saying as a leader? And if you don't engage, I'm probably not paying much attention anyways. This is what was happening during the pandemic when people were stuck on Zoom, when we were suddenly forced to kind of work with CEOs and companies around the world who were lost in terms of connecting because now it was only virtual. So we were trying to get people to understand, if you don't engage, that's why people have, how many other windows do you think the average person would have open while on a Zoom? Probably at least 3. What do you think?
I was going to say at least a dozen.
That's awesome. So I'm being nice. I say 3.
You're being so nice. You're being
she
so
says
nice.
A dozen.
I think I'm underestimating.
No, I think probably you're closer to right. I say maybe around the 8, only because I don't know how many people have open before the computer crashes. But this is the idea. If you keep people engaged and you think about connecting, whether it's a normal meeting that you do every single week with your leadership team, or if you're presenting something, you always connect, you always engage, and then you always outreach in some sort of form in order to keep this dialogue going.
I think that is so spot on, and it makes sense as to the why you're truly flying around working with these large organizations and teaching, coaching, and connecting in so many places.
Yeah.
What has surprised you in the work you do?
I think one of the things that surprised me that I wasn't necessarily thinking about was the fact that culturally, there are so many similarities, even though if you look, for example, in, an Asian culture versus, someone coming from Spain, there are differences in the way people express themselves. But it was kind of surprising for me to see that at the end of the day, as human beings, we are all so alike. I mean, nobody likes standing up to speak in front of a large group of people for the most part. Everybody feels some form of self-consciousness. Everybody thinks of leading with information versus being engaging. So that was a thing that I started realizing the more and more that I traveled and worked in different countries, that, wow, we're all so alike.
It happens to be so true. I'll always say people are people.
Yeah.
People are people. Yes, we come from different cultures, from different experiences. And I think that's what makes us fun. And I think the greatest leaders are the ones who lean in to learn.
Yeah.
Versus,
I agree.
So, I'm a firm believer that the biggest heart or the biggest component of communication is strong listening skills.
Yeah, this is a big one. This is a big one.
So many people think, oh, we're going to have some communications training. Okay, I have to be on my game. I'm ready to talk.
You're like, wait a minute.
What do you see out there? And what do you see out there?
So one thing that I see is, just to kind of build upon what you're saying about listening, as I think people underestimate the power of active listening. And I'm going to use a few examples that I think people listening would understand. But okay, so you are the leader of a meeting and you're starting the meeting. And what happens when you start talking? You're ready, you have your talking notes, you're good, you're sizzling. Boom, the next person on your team starts talking. What are you doing? You're checking your WhatsApp. And you're the leader. So people already see that you're not actively listening. And do you feel like connecting to someone who's not actively listening to you? Probably not. And then you wonder why your team doesn't feel as connected, or they're not opening up more because they look up on the Zoom or even in the meeting and then they see, wow, the leader is not even listening. So for me, that's kind of a big thing. And the other example I would give is when we are actually standing up and giving a presentation. Are we listening? Of course we're listening. Even if I'm not meaning for you to have a dialogue with me, I'm still listening. I'm still actively listening while I present, just to understand the energy of the room, to understand how people are reacting. So I see a big problem with active listening out there. That's one of the things. And also lack of preparation and practice. I think communication and speaking in particular is one of those things that everybody thinks they know. And everybody thinks like, nah, I don't need to practice that. You would never think that about any other profession or skill. But I see out there that a lot of people just don't put in the work.
It's, so you come from a theater background.
Yes.
Okay. I come from a dance background.
Woo.
And I would say, I think we're both, from our backgrounds, are used to and understand the importance of practice. And I mean, I remember as a kid, if it was my turn cleaning the table to do the dishes, I was usually doing the dishes and doing tendus, a ballet step, as I was doing it, it was just this, before I used to, when I was performing back in the day, I would do the first 8 or 16 counts of the piece that I was coming in to do, right? In like, a little short and like an abbreviated version before, with the music in my head. And before I speak, I do the first 1, 2, or 3 sentences, usually awesome. The first 1, 2, sometimes 3 sentences of what is my opening. And we rely on muscle memory.
Totally.
And if you're not prepared, you have no muscle memory.
That's exactly true.
That's the point of my long story here, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't spend the time in prep, you have no muscle memory. So how do you, how do you stay on your toes when you're speaking if you don't have the muscle memory? I just don't get it.
Well, a lot of times people don't, or this is when you get sometimes the speakers who just start rambling on and on and on, going down the side road, the side streets, all these things, because they haven't figured out through their practice how to kind of keep moving and keep on the journey. But I think it's a great example that you gave with dance also, because speaking and practice is not something that you do silently. And I say that because majority of people who prepare, they think prepare means to write down their notes or to write a presentation. So most people, and fess up if you're listening, folks, think through this sort of preparation of like, wow, I spent 2 hours preparing what I'm going to say, but how much time did they actually stand up and practice it? Imagine as a dancer, if you just went over it only in your head and you never actually stood up, then finally you get out there and you don't have it at all in your muscle memory. So especially with bigger presentations, you need to actually speak the words aloud. You need to actually stand up and present, or get up in front of that, boardroom, and get that out so that you feel good and that you have it kind of in your muscle memory, or you're well practiced.
It happens to be so true. And I know, I am that person who writes out my entire presentation. Okay. So that is step one. And then that presentation ends up being able to be delivered. It can't have more. And listeners, you could laugh at me. It can't have more than 5 fingers. It can't have more than 3 to 5 talking points.
Love it.
Okay. Because I have to be able to, on one hand, be able to count down, and you guys aren't, LaQuita's watching me in a video, but you guys, so I want you to imagine me holding my hand up and pressing, okay, point 1 is the pinky, point 2 is the ring finger, point 3, right? And then point 1 goes with this story, and point 2 has this example, right? And it starts with me spending those 2 hours to write that long presentation, and then spending the time to drill it down to fit on my fingers my finger memory into
I love it.
3 to 5 one hand. If it goes to 2 hands, I can't remember that much.
That's, I like that you said, I like that you called it finger memory. But another thing you said, which is so important, is that you can't remember that much, but you think the audience can. Of course, what you're saying is absolutely true. You have it on one hand. So this is something that the audience is probably able to also absorb. But I also like the idea that it's also good to write. You can write and then you can practice. But the more that you practice, you start understanding the flow of what's happening, even without trying to memorize word for word. You don't necessarily have to do that. If you write it down, then you're practicing and it starts coming in. You make it your own, is something we would say, like in acting, you get the script and you have the lines, but eventually it's like you never even read the lines. So this is the idea. It's the same thing with speaking in any scenario.
And I think, there's the next piece of when you make it your own, is that what you were referring to is the active listening, and that's listening to what's going on in the audience, right? And I will always say, I've never given the same presentation twice because the audience is different.
True.
It might be my same content, but it's never the same presentation because the audience is different. And the audience has a participation in that presentation, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And this is why I love audiences who are like super involved and into it. I remember a few times in my career speaking places, and the more quiet audiences, I was like, guys, I want, like, give me a smile, give me a frown, give me a laugh, whatever you want to do, just give me something, because it's like, this is a fun thing to be able to feed off of when you are presenting.
LaQuita, you are so brilliant. If we're going to leave with our listeners with one tip on communication that we can take forward. So ladies and gentlemen, one finger, right? One finger, we can remember one thing. What is your one thing we could be more aware of to take forward?
I'm going to have to go with building your stories, because storytelling is the key not only to who you are, but it's just a key to standing out in terms of personal brand and company. So find those stories and use them.
I love it. I love it. How can our listeners continue to learn from you, connect with you?
They can hang out at my LinkedIn. I like people hanging out and having fun. So you can head over to my LinkedIn. It is LaQuita Cleare. I'm happy to connect. And you can also go to my website, theclearecommunicationacademy.com.
I love it. So listeners, what did I say before? I said, I asked about an aha moment. Why? When we pay attention to the things that make an impact on us, what did I take away from here? What was your aha moment in our conversation today? Think about that. Take a moment, that one finger, write it down, and then decide what action you're going to take on that, because it's in the actions from what we learn that make a difference. Thank you so much for joining us here on Her Success Story. We will see you next week with more great content, interviews, and I hope you had some fun. See you next time.